I wasn't looking for missing inventions when I started researching early American patent law. I was going through old congressional records from the 1830s, dry stuff, the kind of reading that makes your eyes glaze over. But then I found a single letter from a government clerk dated January 1837. He was describing rows and rows of empty shelves that had been full just weeks before. And something about the way he wrote it, the heaviness in his words, made me stop scrolling, because what vanished from those shelves didn't just disappear from a building. It disappeared from memory, from the record, from the story we tell about American innovation. And almost nobody talks about it. The fire broke out on the night of December 15th, 1836. The building was called Blodgett's Hotel. It sat in the middle of Washington, D.C., just blocks from the White House. The upper floors held the General Post Office. But below, in the lower rooms, sat the entire collection of the United States Patent Office. Every single model, every drawing, every written record of every invention filed in America since 1790. Think about that number. 46 years of ideas, 46 years of machines, tools, farming equipment, steam engines, chemical processes, textile looms, surgical instruments, all stored in one building with wooden floors, oil lamps, and no fireproofing. The fire started in the basement. Nobody caught it in time. By the time someone smelled the smoke, flames had already climbed the walls. Wooden shelves lined every room, packed tight with paper files and small hand-built patent models. Imagine it. Rows of hand-carved machines, each one built by an inventor's own hands to prove their idea worked. Tiny gears, brass fittings, cotton threads, and leather belts, all of it sitting on dry pine shelves soaked in decades of dust and lamp oil. It caught fast, it spread faster. By morning, the building was a hollow, smoking shell. According to records held at the National Archives, roughly 7,000 official patents were destroyed. But the real number is higher. Some estimates reach close to 10,000 when you count the supporting documents, the detailed technical drawings, the working models that inventors had been required to submit alongside their applications. These weren't copies. There was no backup system, no second archive, no duplicates stored across town. The originals were everything, and they burned. Commissioner Henry Leavitt Ellsworth wrote to Congress weeks later. He described the loss as total. He wasn't being dramatic, he was being accurate. The Patent Office tried to recover what it could. They asked inventors to resubmit their paperwork. They wrote to state offices. They contacted private lawyers who might have kept copies. In the end, after years of effort, they managed to restore about 2,845 patents out of the original collection. That means somewhere around 4,000 inventions, maybe more, just vanished. No description survives, no drawing, no name attached, nothing left to tell you what those ideas even were. And that's when the official explanation stopped making sense. This raises a simple but critical question. If thousands of inventions were lost forever and no one alive can say what they contained, how do we actually know what America invented in those first 46 years? You can't mourn what you can't name, you can't study what you can't see, and you definitely can't give credit to someone whose life's work turned to ash before anyone thought to write it down twice. But this kind of disappearance, this total erasure of knowledge, but it isn't, and you can't. In 48 BC, fire swept through the harbor of Alexandria, Egypt. The great library, the single largest collection of knowledge in the ancient world, was caught in the blaze. The shelves held scrolls gathered from Greece, Persia, India, Babylon, and Egypt itself, texts on medicine, astronomy, mathematics, engineering, philosophy. Nobody knows the exact count. Some ancient sources say 400,000 scrolls, others say more. But here's what matters most. Nobody kept a full catalog of what the library contained, so just like those American patents, we don't even know what's missing. You can look at the work of researchers at the Bibliotheca Alexandrina today. They've spent decades trying to piece together what that library once held. The gaps they've found aren't small. They're enormous, entire branches of ancient science, referenced in surviving texts but nowhere to be found. Books, quoted by other books that no longer exist. Ghosts in the margins. Now, go east, Baghdad, 1258. Mongol forces under Hulagu Khan broke through the city walls and sacked the capital of the Abbasid Caliphate. They destroyed the House of Wisdom. That wasn't just a library, it was the intellectual heart of the Islamic Golden Age. For centuries, scholars there had gathered, translated, and expanded on the knowledge of the ancient world. Books on algebra, optics, chemistry, medicine, irrigation, astronomy. The Mongols threw them into the Tigris River. Eyewitnesses wrote that the water ran black with ink for 6 days. Not a theory, not a legend, an eyewitness account. Centuries of scientific progress, gathered from across Asia, North Africa, and the Middle East, dumped into a river and carried out to sea. Gone. Crossed the Atlantic, the Yucatan Peninsula. 1562, Spanish missionaries, led by Bishop Diego de Landa, gathered every Maya manuscript they could find, and they burned them. De Landa called them works of the devil. Superstition, he wrote about the burning himself, almost proudly. The Maya had developed one of the most advanced writing systems in the ancient Americas. They built a calendar more accurate than the one Europe was using at the time. They'd tracked the movements of Venus with a precision that still surprises astronomers. Almost all of it was destroyed in a single afternoon. Today, only 3 confirmed Maya codices survive. 3 out of what scholars believe were thousands. You can see one of them at the Saxon State Library in Dresden, Germany. It's called the Dresden Codex. 78 pages of astronomical tables, eclipse predictions, and ritual calendars. 78 pages. That's all that remains of an entire civilization's written record. Look at those numbers again. Ask yourself what was on the pages that didn't survive. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision. India, the year 1193. Bakhtiar Khilji's forces reached the great university at Nalanda, in what's now the state of Bihar. Nalanda had been standing for over 700 years. It held 9 stories of library space. Picture that. 9 floors of handwritten manuscripts stacked floor to ceiling. Monks had spent generations copying texts on philosophy, logic, grammar, medicine, and metallurgy. The ink was made from soot and tree resin. The pages were cut from palm leaves, dried and pressed flat. Students came from Tibet, China, Korea, and Central Asia to study there. When Khilji's men set the fires, the library burned for 3 months. Not 3 days. Not 3 weeks. 3 months. The palm leaves caught like kindling. When the smoke finally cleared, almost nothing remained. Not the books, not the monastery halls, not the accumulated knowledge of 7 centuries. According to Tibetan historian Taranatha, the destruction was so complete that Buddhism in India never fully recovered its scholarly tradition. Think about that. A single fire changed the course of an entire religion. And then China. 213 BC, Emperor Qin Shi Huang ordered the burning of books across his entire empire, history texts, philosophy, poetry, records of rival states, anything that challenged his version of truth. Scholars who refused to surrender their writings were executed. Hundreds of them, buried alive according to the historian Sima Qian. Not in one place, not in 2, but across an entire empire, an entire generation of thinkers, erased by a single order, signed by a single man. The dirt that covered them is still there. The ideas they carried are not. You know what's strange about all of this? How quiet it is, how little noise these losses make in the way we teach history. Ask someone on the street about the patent office fire. They won't know what you're talking about. Ask a college student about Nalanda. Most couldn't point to it on a map. The fire at the patent office gets a paragraph in most textbooks, maybe 2. The same is true for Nalanda, for the Maya codices, for Baghdad. Each event is studied inside its own little box. Ancient history over here. Colonial studies over there. American bureaucracy in a different department entirely. But nobody steps back. Nobody lines them up and looks at the full picture. Nobody asks why the same pattern keeps showing up century after century, continent after continent. Not active suppression. Passive erasure. But there's no dedicated exhibit asking what those 4,000 missing patents might have contained. No research program running simulations on the gaps. No historian assigned to trace what's absent. It's treated as an unfortunate accident. A fire, a shame. Move on. The National Archives has a small section on the 1836 event. You can read Ellsworth's letters there. You can see the congressional testimony about the aftermath. But the questions end where the records end. And that's exactly the problem. The absence becomes invisible over time. The gap fills itself with silence. And silence, if you leave it long enough, starts to feel like an answer. Questions that simply aren't asked. A museum labels a surviving artifact. A university catalogs a remaining document. They describe what exists. They photograph it. They preserve it carefully. But they almost never describe what's missing. And when they do, it's a footnote. Records incomplete. That phrase shows up hundreds of times in the Patent Office restoration files. Records incomplete. As if that's an ending. As if the absence of evidence is the same as evidence of nothing. It isn't. Not even close. Here's something that should bother you. The restored patents, those 28845 that were recovered, came mostly from well-connected inventors. People who had money, people who had lawyers, people who kept personal copies. But the small inventors? The farmers who built a better plow? The blacksmiths who figured out a stronger hinge? They didn't have lawyers. They didn't keep copies. They filed their one original and trusted the government to protect it. Those are the ones who vanished completely. Not the wealthy, not the well-known, the ordinary people, the ones whose names nobody wrote down a second time. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. I'm not claiming there was some grand conspiracy to destroy human knowledge across centuries. I'm not saying someone planned these fires. That's not what this is. I'm asking something much simpler. Why does the destruction of knowledge keep happening across completely different civilizations and time periods? And why do we keep treating every single case like it was just an isolated accident? What if the real loss isn't just the objects? What if it's the connections between them? Those early American patents covered everything from water pumps to chemical dyes to mechanical looms. Some were filed by people whose names will never recover. What if one of those lost inventions was a breakthrough? What if someone in 1812 figured out a principle that wouldn't be rediscovered for another 50 years? We'd never know. There'd be no record, no credit, no trace. And what if the same thing happened in Alexandria? What if a scroll in that library held an idea that Europe wouldn't arrive at until the Renaissance, 1500 years later? What if the monks at Nalanda had written down medical techniques that researchers today are only now starting to understand through modern science? And here's one more. What if some of the great discoveries we celebrate today were actually rediscoveries? What if someone already figured it out centuries earlier in a building that burned down before anyone could spread the word? We treat invention like it moves forward in a straight line. But what if it doesn't? What if it circles back? Over and over, reinventing things that were already invented by people whose work no longer exists. These aren't fantasies. These are reasonable questions. The Dresden Codex proved the Maya understood. Venus cycles with a precision that European astronomers didn't match until the 17th century. That's not speculation. That's a verified, measured fact. And that's from one of only 3 surviving books. 3 books out of thousands. What was in the rest? The evidence suggests something much larger than a series of unlucky fires. It suggests a world where knowledge has always been more fragile than we want to believe, where the things we build and write and discover can vanish overnight, not because someone powerful wanted them gone, but because nobody thought to protect them. And that might be the most unsettling part of all this. Not the burning, the forgetting, the speed at which we move on. Right now, today, the ruins of Nalanda still sit in Bihar, India. You can walk through them. You can put your hand on the stone. The foundations are still there, wide and flat, covered in moss. The walls of the old library hall still stand at waist height, worn smooth by 800 years of monsoon rain. The ground beneath your feet once held the weight of 9 stories of knowledge. Now it holds grass. In Washington, the current Patent Office building holds records going back to 1836. Everything before that date is a ghost. A gap on the shelf, a file number with no file behind it, a drawer that opens to nothing. The Dresden Codex still sits under glass in Germany. 78 pages of Maya genius, surviving only because one copy traveled across an ocean before the bonfires swallowed the rest. And in the basement storage rooms of the Smithsonian, rooms that most visitors will never see, a few charred patent models sit in archive boxes. Small wooden machines, half melted, edges blackened. Pieces of ideas that someone, a long time ago, believed were worth building, worth protecting, worth remembering. The stone remembers, even if we don't. And if this is what we know was lost, if these are the fires we recorded, the destructions we actually documented, the gaps we can count and name, how many others burned so completely that they left no trace at all?